So a team of researchers from Stellenbosch University will release reports into teacher demographics in South Africa. I actually think that's already happened. The 3-year project, which is titled the Teacher Demographic Dividend, aims to study the incoming wave of teacher retirements, among other things. This research will also look into teacher productivity and how much they earn, among others. For more on this, let's bring in Professor Spaull from Stellenbosch University. In fact, he's one of the principal investigators of this particular study. Prof, great to have you on the program. Thank you so much indeed for making time to speak to us. And we really are spoiled for choice about what exactly to unpack from this report, aren't we? But let me first start by understanding at least the kind of methodology that you, used in order to get some of these findings. Which teachers were you looking into? Which institutions? And perhaps tell us why.
Sure, and thanks for having me. So the aim of this research, as you mentioned, is to look into teacher demographics and to see which teachers are retiring when. The focus is on public school teachers, so these are not teachers that are employed in private schools or independent schools, and it's also not looking at school governing body teachers, so schools that charge fees often hire more teachers. These are the teachers that are paid for by the government through tax revenue that it raises. And the way that we do this research, and there's a large team of researchers, about 16 different researchers that are working on this at RECEP at Stellenbosch, is we look at teacher salary databases from the Department of Basic Education. So this is the huge database that exists that tells us all of the teachers that are publicly employed, and that has data on things like their qualifications, their age, gender, which school are they allocated to. So we can tell quite predictably who is going to retire when, because teachers can retire, or they should retire from 60. Some retire as late as 65. But because 49% of public school teachers are aged 50 or higher, it means there's about to be a really large wave of teacher retirements, and that's going to have big implications.
Sure. And that's exactly what I was going to ask. In fact, I remember civil society organizations sounding the alarm some months ago around this looming crisis, essentially. They're pointing out that we're not replacing teachers fast enough in order to be able to ensure that, at least on the basis of capacity, we're able to keep teaching and learning going. Is that similar to what you found in the study?
Yes. So what we find here is we looked at two things. So we look at both the demand for teachers, so whether or not the provinces are hiring the teachers that are being produced, as well as the supply, whether or not universities are producing enough teachers. And what we showed is that over the last 10 years, there's been a rapid increase in the number of teachers that have been produced by universities, and that's in keeping with DHET, the Department of Higher Education and Training's targets. So the universities have done really well at increasing the number of teachers that are being produced. It's actually increased from about 9,000 to 28,000 since about 2013. So a huge increase. But the big challenge is that provinces are not hiring those teachers that are being produced. So we used to hire into public schools about 75% of the teachers that were produced by universities in 2015. But by 2019, this was only about, or 2020, this was only about 50%. So we're only hiring half of the teachers that are being produced, which means that class sizes are increasing. Because as teachers retire and as learner numbers increase because of population increase and learner repetition rates going down and more kids making it to matric, which is basically also an increase in enrollment, we're starting to see class sizes increase significantly. And this is probably because provinces are trying to save costs by not hiring teachers when other teachers retire.
Oh, okay. I suppose you've answered the next question I had, which was why? I mean, why are provinces not hiring the teachers if the teachers are there?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the questions. So we actually had a dialogue with the Department of Basic Education, National Treasury, Department of Higher Education officials on the 10th of November in Pretoria. And the aim of that is to work closely with government, because this is also a government-endorsed research program. It's not just the sort of researchers doing this in an ivory tower. The reason why we're doing this is so that for proactive policy making. And one of the things that came up there was that there was some contestation as to why provinces are not hiring. Some Treasury officials were saying, the money is there, but provinces still get to decide how they use that money. Other provinces were saying there's not enough money. So I think this is actually something that's being put forward in the 2023 research agenda for this project, is to figure out that exact question. Why are provinces not hiring the teachers?
Part of what you've also looked into through the study are what's been termed levels of in-service teacher knowledge. You'll explain what that means for us, but what I could glean from it is that, for one, you found that the levels of content knowledge for some teachers in this country is lower than their counterparts in places like Zimbabwe and Kenya. Tell us a bit more about that. Is that subject-specific, age-specific, or is that what you're finding generally across the board?
Sure. So one of the things that we do is we can measure teachers' content knowledge using a test that was done. Actually, the last time it was done was in 2013, called the SACMEC study. So it's the Southern and Eastern African Consortium for Monitoring Education Quality. It's a bit of a mouthful. Yeah. And it measures grade 6 reading and maths teachers' content knowledge in South Africa, as well as about 10 other African countries where they all write the exact same test. Now, the reason why we were interested in this for the Teacher Demographics project is that we were interested to know, are the content knowledge levels of older teachers higher or lower or the same as younger teachers? Because as older teachers retire, they're going to be replaced by younger teachers. And what we found was that younger teachers actually have much higher levels of mathematics content knowledge than older teachers, which might sound counterintuitive because older teachers, you'd expect them to have more experience, right. They've got more, perhaps they have more knowledge. It turns out that's not true. And the leading explanation is that older teachers were trained under apartheid, they were educated under apartheid, where there was a deliberately disempowering curriculum. The apartheid government was quite explicit about not wanting black South Africans to excel in mathematics. So I think what we're seeing here is a big gap where younger teachers have much higher levels of content knowledge than older teachers. But, and this is a thing that's quite difficult to hold in your mind at the same time, even though younger teachers have much higher levels of content knowledge, those levels are still extremely low. So they're still only scoring 55% on a primary school maths test. And this is in first year and in final year of their Bachelor of Education degrees at university, which is really quite shocking.
Whoa. I think you need to say that again, because I think I might have misheard you. They're scoring 50% for a grade?
For primary school. Primary school. So
yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So there's a study that was done as one of these. It's actually note 11. Looking at the quality of primary mathematics teacher preparation in South Africa. So it was done by Professor Nikki Roberts and Dr. Ketelo Malloy. And what they did is they looked at the findings from the PrimTED study, which looks at first year and final year B.Ed students, so Bachelor of Education degree students, at a number of different South African universities. We don't name any of the universities. And what they find is that when tested on primary school content knowledge, the average for final year, fourth year B.Ed students across the 3 years of 2017, 2018, and 2019 was 52%.
Wow.
And for first year students, it was only 47%. So there's only a very small increase in mathematics content knowledge of students at universities that are studying. And I think this is a really big problem because it's highlighting the fact that we're not imparting content knowledge. We're also not selecting teachers into teaching that have high levels of content knowledge.
Really sobering that. Of course, what takes place inside the classroom is just as important as perhaps what might unfold in the school environment. We've seen various reports, at least in the last couple of weeks actually, of teachers who are complaining about a constraint on resources, but also of working in environments that are not conducive for them to essentially do their jobs. And there's a whole list of issues around this. You know, there's crime and violence, etc., etc. Interestingly enough, though, your report has found that even with the existing constraints, teachers can do more. They can do better.
Yeah, so what that was, I think the stat that you're referring to there is that with our current levels of content knowledge that we have, if we compare ourselves to other African countries, teachers with the same level of content knowledge and, for example, even larger class sizes, South Africa actually has relatively small class sizes compared to most countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I think Botswana is the only exception to that, is they have higher levels of knowledge gains for their kids, the students that those teachers are teaching, compared to, for a given level of teacher content knowledge compared to South African teachers. But that doesn't mean that the constraints that you've just mentioned, things like violence, lack of infrastructure, water and sanitation in schools, as well as a big one is rising class sizes, are limitations on both drawing people into teaching and also what teachers, whether or not they're motivated to teach, whether they are able to teach. But I think something that I want to mention that is an important point when it comes to resources is that there's a big trade-off between the number of teachers that we can hire and what we pay those teachers. In our terminology, we would call it salary versus headcount. So in other words, if you increase teacher salaries significantly, and it's increased by more than 15% in real terms since 2013, much higher than inflation, it means that you can hire fewer teachers with the same budget. So what we've seen is there's sort of this race between teacher wages and the budget, and the teacher wages have been increasing much faster than budget allocations, which means that we have very highly paid teachers. Teachers get paid on average 43,000 Rand a month, total package including benefits, which I think everyone is very surprised by. We have a whole document on that explaining, using a payslip, where those numbers come from. But that puts them in the top 5% of the income distribution. Now, whether we should be paying teachers more or using some of these additional resources that we have as a country to provide textbooks, reduced class sizes, more infrastructure, etc., I think that's a real trade-off that we have to be asking in South Africa.
Speaking about those different scenarios, have you been able to ascertain what it would take for us to actually get better teachers? Is it about increasing their entry requirements in university so that you really do get the cream of the crop qualifying for this degree to begin with? Or do we incentivize people in the form of essentially paying them more? Because ultimately, when you take up a job, for instance, as a teacher, there's an opportunity cost, right? You're letting go of some other potential opportunity so that you can be in the classroom.
Yeah. So one of the very interesting studies that was done, this was by Dr. Deborah Shepherd. So we were using quarterly labor force survey data to compare teacher wages compared to other public sector wages and teacher wages relative to other professions in the private sector. And what she shows in her paper is that over if we look at 2017 compared to earlier years, teacher salaries have caught up significantly with other professions. So there's for a given level of education, in other words, you need an undergraduate degree to become a teacher, teachers are not underpaid for their level of qualification and skills, and that their relative position in the labor market has actually improved significantly over the last 10 years. And I think that's a really important finding. But the other point that you mentioned there is the type of people that we draw into teaching. Another area that we looked at was the entry requirements and the matric mathematics marks of teachers that are coming into teaching. And what we found is that the percentage of B.Ed students that scored more than 50% on mathematics, so not mathematics literacy, but mathematics, was only 10% at UNISA. So only 10% of B.Ed students that are enrolling at UNISA, and this was in 2014 to 2016, got more than 50% for maths. And yet those people are going to become teachers. And if you contrast that to other degrees, that's 18% at UNISA. But even if we pick a contact university, take something like the University of Pretoria, only 31% of B.Ed students at Pretoria got more than 50% for maths, compared to 84% for those in other degrees.
Sure.
So basically, the kids that are enrolling in other degrees are getting much higher marks in mathematics compared to the people that are becoming teachers. And that is something that can change with things like advertising programs and making sure that the right people go into teaching.
So very quickly, Nick, are we saying that the bar is just too low to be a teacher in this country?
I think what we're saying is that the bar can be higher given what teachers earn. That we can actually expect more from incoming teachers, and that we need to if we want learning outcomes for kids to improve.
Nick Spaull, a fascinating discussion, at least from the findings of this report, and very engaging explanations. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us. Really appreciate it. Nick Spaull is an associate professor at Stellenbosch University.